You know that feeling when you're about to score 30% off, but they want your number? Ugh. Give them your Line 2 number instead. It's a second line on your phone, perfect for nabbing promo codes without inviting spam to your party. Sign up for every discount under the sun, then block the junk texts that follow. You get all the perks, but none of the spammy baggage. More codes, less chaos. Visit line2.com/audio or download Line 2 in the App Store and get your shopping sidekick today. Because the only thing blowing up your phone should be good deals.
Hello, book lovers. Welcome to Must Love Books. Hello and welcome back to Must Love Books. Today I am here with Sarah Archer and Landis Wade of the Charlotte Readers podcast to talk about their writing duet, Death by Podcasting. Sarah is a screenwriter, co-host of the Charlotte Readers podcast, and author of The Plus One. Landis is a recovering trial lawyer who writes lighthearted legal thrillers, mysteries, and essays. He is the founder of the Charlotte Readers podcast and author of Deadly Declarations, as well as a series of Christmas novellas. Hello and welcome.
Glad to be
Hi,
here.
thanks for
Thank
having
you.
us.
How are you guys?
Well, Sarah, you speak up first because you've got the recent addition to your family.
Yeah, we were just talking before we started recording about I had a baby who I think when this comes out will be a little bit older and maybe starting to sit up on her own and eat solid foods and stuff, but she's not quite there yet. So tired but good. Enjoying the experience.
Yeah, I'm having a good time with a 3-year-old grandson. Not quite the same as what Sarah's going through with a new infant, but lots of fun, lots of fun.
Excellent. I love that. And so let's go ahead and dive into Death by Podcasting. I did the audiobook on Audible and I loved listening to it. It was such a fun ride. So I'd love to hear about your writing inspirations and how you guys went about with co-writing this project together.
Sure. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for listening and enjoying it. We really appreciate that. And I'll let Landis talk a little bit about where the idea came from because he was the one who initially had the idea for this. But, we had each done our own individual writing projects and been working together on the podcast for maybe about a year, I guess, at that point. And decided, hey, maybe we should try co-writing something. And initially we thought like, oh, it'll be maybe a 10,000 word short story. And it kind of expanded into a novella because we were having a lot of fun and coming up with these writer characters who are not based on any actual podcast guests we have. Thankfully, none of our guests have expressed any desire to murder us.
Yeah,
But yeah, we did have fun playing with like writer tropes and different genre stereotypes and that type of thing.
yeah. We had interviewed several authors on the podcast over the years about this thing called co-writing, and it always had been a curiosity to me. Never had time to really put it into practice, but we had just finished putting out these 8 nonfiction quote books on the podcast, and Sarah and I had worked together to put those together. And I thought, hey, maybe we could do something, fiction wise. And Sarah's like, well, I've got all these projects. I said, no, hear me out. Maybe we'll just, it's going to be about podcasting. It's going to be about 2 podcasters, Sarah, and they're going to, maybe get killed by the authors that are going to interview them. And I said, you're up for that, right? And so that's sort of where the idea started. And we can talk more about how we did it. But yeah, that's where it came from.
That is too funny. And I have to say, I love the names that you guys came up with. Salty Remarks and Raspy Fuse. Those are hilarious.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, we had a lot of fun with the character names, and I think they also tell you a lot about the tone that it's a murder mystery, and there is some real danger that the characters are in, but it's also sort of tongue in cheek and kind of the cozy mystery category where it's a fun, lighthearted, entertaining mystery, I think. And we have, in addition to the podcast co-hosts, we have the authors who they're set to interview. I guess we should probably tell you just kind of the basis of what the book is about so people aren't lost. But it's these 2 podcast co-hosts who interview authors on their show. And they have their big year-end event that they're going to do a live recording that's coming up. And they find out that one of the 3 authors they're set to interview has plans to murder them. They get this anonymous message. They don't know who sent the message. They don't know which of the authors wants to kill them or why. but they have to figure it out before they record, and kind of pull on their knowledge from their own experience reading and writing mysteries and thrillers, and figure out who might actually have it out for them. But the three authors they're going to interview are, there's Della Molasses, who is a romance author. There's Edwin Nocturne, who is this very kind of dark thriller writer, and then William Z. Wisp, who is the poet who definitely looks down on the sentence slingers, as he calls them, the prose writers. He thinks poetry is another art form that he's not in the same category as the others.
Yeah, and I would say, Krystle, I appreciate the fact that you've got the sense of humor, and you've got what we're trying to do, because some people who've looked at the book were going, "Wow, these names are silly. These are, whatever." But it kind of, it kind of fits this murders in the building mantra we were looking for. This idea that, yeah, we're obviously telling you right off the start, we're poking fun, right, at writers, and we're poking fun at podcasters, and we are writers and we are podcasters, and we have a sense of humor. So, don't take it too seriously, and so the names are a way to kind of do that. And, yeah, we could have gone over the top a little bit with the names as we got into it, but look, we were doing this because it was going to be something fun to do, not to make $1 million, right? So the idea was to have fun and also to learn something in the process. So I give Sarah credit for William Z. Wisp, Della Molasses, and Edwin Nocturne. I love those as soon as she mentioned them. I think I came up with Salty Remarks and Raspy Fuse, but then we sort of blended as we named other people as we went along. And it was just a fun project to work on.
And the names, like, as you said, they really set the tone, very tongue-in-cheek, very satirical. And I love that you brought up Only Murders in the Building. My sibling and I, we joke around, we call it like Only Killers in the Apartment Complex, and making up silly over-the-top names like that, because the show itself it's silly and over-top, and it's supposed to be.
Right. That's exactly what we were looking for.
Yeah, I love that show. And I despite all the murders that keep happening in that building, I want to live there just because the decor is so amazing.
Oh my goodness, it's so beautiful. Like, it's worth it at that point.
Yeah, I'll get murdered. That's fine.
If you could hang out with Steve Martin and Martin Short and all those characters, yeah, that'd be fun.
Yeah, and you're always going to have new neighbors coming in.
It's true. High turnover rate.
Exactly.
So, what would you say are the benefits and challenges with co-writing a project like this together?
Well, I guess some of the benefits, I mean, for one thing, it's helpful to have, two heads as opposed to one. I think the project went a little bit faster just because we were both able to work on it at the same time. And I benefited from Landis having the idea and doing a lot of the initial outlining and kind of figuring out the plot and where the story was going to go. Also from Landis's mystery experience, because his book Deadly Declarations has a mystery element. So he had written that type of story before and I hadn't. So, and I think it's also just fun too to write with someone else, especially on something like this that has some humor to it, or you can kind of base it a little bit on some of your own experiences. It makes it just enjoyable in a way that sometimes when you're kind of pounding away at your own computer alone for, the 12th hour in a row. Not that I ever sustain that long of a writing session. I usually burn out after like 2 or 3 hours. But yeah, I think it's just fun to write with someone else. And then also, I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about maybe how we published it, but we self-published this one, which was helpful to work with Landis on that as well, because he has some past experience with indie publishing. And so he had those kind of network of contacts built up and knew what the process is like. And so I was able to just kind of go along with that and see what the process is like from the inside.
Yeah, and I would say a bit of an echo to what Sarah said about two heads are better than one, in the sense that, usually when you're writing alone, and then at some point you're going to get beta feedback or editorial feedback. We had that as we went along, so we were writing, we're giving each other feedback as we went. And Sarah, also, I think, if you're going to do a project like this, pick somebody to work with who has the same kind of work ethic as you do. Sarah and I really kind of binged on this thing together. She would work on it hard, I would work on it hard, and we might take a couple of days break while the other one's working on it, but then when they gave it back to us, we jumped on it, we kind of worked on it and then sent it back. So working with somebody that's got the same sort of, writing, I don't know, craziness or passion or whatever, is a good idea. And then also just, not being afraid to tell the other person you're working with, let's don't go that direction, or, let's fix this. Or a lot of times Sarah and I were dropping notes into the Word document we're working on about our thoughts or our questions, and we'd answer each other when we send a draft back. So that's one thing. The other thing is, Sarah mentioned I had this experience with mystery writers, but she's also written a lot as well, and has got skill sets that I don't have. So find somebody that's not just like you, but complements what you do as well, because writing the plot out is one thing, but adding all the sensoriness to it, the sight, the sounds, the smells, and definitely the poetry scenes for me, because I'm not a poet. And I said to Sarah, you're writing everything that this poet's thinking, because I don't know what poets think, even when I listen to them talk. So, find somebody, that you can work with who's got a different skill set, but sort of the same stamina.
Yeah, it seems like it balanced out really well.
Yeah. Well, I hope so. Yeah. I mean, that was our goal. We did have a lot of drafts, back and forth, but because we sort of sat down first and kind of outlined it, we didn't stick to that outline. We had something to start with. It gave us the ability to really complete the rough draft in about, 60 days. And then we worked on editing it for about a month. So it was a pretty fast turnaround.
Yeah, that's pretty great.
Having those multiple drafts too is really key when you're co-writing, because, even if you are two people who have fairly similar sensibilities as writers, there's always going to be differences. So we would each write a chapter on our own, and then we would go back through and kind of rewrite each other's chapters. And I think that helped to blend the styles and the tone and the just sort of diction that we use. So I think if you're co-writing something, then plan on going through enough drafts that you can sort of even it out, so that ideally people won't be able to tell in the end who initially wrote which part.
Yeah, and I would add to that normally I write in a program called Scrivener, but for this project, because we're going to be sharing it, we did it in Word. And initially I said, oh, well, let's just put it in Google Docs, and you write some and I write some. Then I realized that's too much pressure, right? Because, you're writing that, if they happen to log on in real time and they can see the crap you've just written, I want to make sure that at least I could write a chapter and go back and fix it a little bit before Sarah saw it, right? So we decided.
I can't believe that sentence you just wrote.
I know, exactly. So we stopped doing that, and we then just started naming the drafts and then trading Word documents. So every time we added something, it became draft 9 or 10 or 11 or whatever.
Yeah, I think with a co-writing project, using Microsoft Word is probably the best way of doing it, because Google Docs can sometimes be a little tricky. And especially if you have people working on it at the same time. I've had Google Docs delete paragraphs that one person was, I've used it for school projects, and I've had it delete paragraphs that one person was working on because someone else logged in at the same time. And it was such a mess that, sending a file back and forth is just so much easier to work on, especially when you're working at the same time. But it also creates all these backdrafts for you in case something does go wrong. Then you've got this whole email thread of everything right there for you if something doesn't get saved right.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I like to save everything just in case. You never know.
Yeah, I hate to be typing on Google Docs as I'm typing. Somebody's deleting right behind what I'm typing.
Yeah, that sounds like a mess.
Yeah, but I would encourage this for anybody that's trying to expand, their writing skill set, because, I learned a lot from Sarah in this process. And, when you work with somebody else, you continue to get over, even if you still harbor any defensiveness with having people look at your work, right, and give you feedback. It just becomes a natural part of the process, and it makes everything better when you're getting two people looking at it as you go.
Yeah, second pair of eyes also, revising what you've already looked at always helps to catch all the things that you missed, which I've done that so many times myself with my own writing. You just look at it so many times that you no longer can see what's wrong, just because it's all become ingrained in your brain and you can't even, notice anything anymore. So yeah, that second pair of eyes, not even just with writing, but through the editing process, sounds super helpful.
Yeah, I think both of us are big advocates of getting feedback, having other people look at your work. Even with this, even though we had our, two sets of eyes looking on it as we were writing, we still gave it to a few different beta readers afterwards to get their feedback too. But I think it was just that extra level of, when you give something to a beta reader, somebody in your critique group, whoever it might be, even if they're a great reader, they're not quite as invested in it as you are. Whereas when it's two co-writers, we're both kind of equally invested in putting the time in to be really thorough with our feedback. But yeah, I think no matter how you're writing, whether you're doing it alone or with a partner, um, getting that feedback is so key. I know for me, like getting feedback and also just taking time away from a draft is really helpful because that kind of gives me that perspective where, like you were saying, Krystle, sometimes you just don't see things because you're too close to it. So, yeah, I have to have other people look at my work to get outside of my own head for sure.
Yeah, and thanks for mentioning that, Sarah, because that was a part of the process. We did work quickly to develop the draft, but we sent it out and we both left it alone for about 3 weeks while other people read it and gave us feedback. And then we got back into working for about another 3 weeks on that feedback, which made, it even better, than it was before. So, getting other people's eyes on, even if it's nothing more than, I don't quite understand this, or I missed this particular thing. I can remember that a couple of people, thought a clue was sending them one way. We went back and looked at it and thought, yeah, we might need to fix that earlier in the draft, and in one time we were giving something away we didn't intend to give away, and we fixed that as well. So having other people look at it is really helpful to the overall process.
Yeah, I think also having a co-writer is nice at that stage as you go through the feedback, because sometimes, as we experienced with this project, you get contradictory notes from different people. Like there were a few places where there would be a specific line or joke that multiple people called out, and we would have one person say, "Oh, I love this. This is like one of my favorite parts." Another person say, "This doesn't work, doesn't fit with the tone," about the exact same sentence. So sometimes, you get notes like that you don't really know what to do with. And I think having another writer there to go through that with you is helpful to kind of check yourself and say, like, okay, am I keeping this just because I'm not willing to kill my darlings, or does it actually work? Or is there something else we can do here? Yeah, it just makes that process of editing, I think, a little bit easier.
Yeah, I think there was a line that somebody didn't like that Sarah written. I really loved it. We figured out a way to keep part of it in, and then something else that somebody didn't like that I'd written, but somebody else liked it. We were just like, it finally was like, this is
We
our
took it
book.
out, then we put it back, and
This is our book. We're gonna, okay, then people won't like everything, but it's our book. So yeah, we're gonna keep this in.
Mhm.
I love that. That's great. And I definitely relate to that so much. Going through beta readers on some of my own work, there were scenes that I loved so much that I had a beta reader who's like, I have no idea what this means or why this is here. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So it really forces you to kind of, take a look at it from an outside perspective and figure out, like, is there something wrong with the scene, or is the problem with what's going on around the scene? Like, do you just need a better lead up to it to, kind of make it more clear and make it flow better? So, not even necessarily having to get rid of that scene that you love so much, but rearranging the things around it to make it work better. And, that's why I think critique partners, beta readers, are both so important parts of the writing process. No matter what style of publishing you intend to pursue, I think that they are extremely important, whether you plan to query or self-publish.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Sarah. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, yeah. I was just going to say too, I think it's helpful to get notes on your writing, but it's also helpful to give notes to people too. I think for me that's been um, such a great kind of education for me as a writer, because it forces you to read in a different way than you would if you're just reading a book for pleasure. It helps you think about, okay, what do I like here? What do I not like? But also why, if I think something is working, what makes it work well? If I think something isn't working, what could be done differently that might help address it? So it just pushes you to think critically in a way that you can then bring back to your own writing too.
And I was going to add something that one of our authors said on the podcast. They might have been quoting someone else even, but they said, when you're getting feedback from other people and you're getting that contradictory feedback, don't look at what they said necessarily. Look at where they pointed. And if they're all pointing to the same place, then that's an area you ought to focus on, even if they've got conflicting opinions about how you should fix it.
Yeah, that's a really good way of looking at it too.
Yeah.
And that's part of why it's valuable, I think, to get as much feedback as you can, because you're going to see when you have multiple people reading and you're getting similar feedback from different people, then okay, that's something I should definitely take a look at.
Yeah, and I think it also speaks to the importance of having not just a large amount of beta readers or critique partners, but some diversity amongst them, whether that is, their own diversity or just what they like to read, someone who reads, a couple different types of genres and what that person might think of your writing versus someone who only reads that genre. And how do their notes and their feedback compare to each other as well?
Yeah, and the other thing we did after we got all the feedback was we ran it through Pro Writing Aid, and I think that identified a lot of helpful things that we could fix in terms of some passive voice we slipped in from time to time to make it active, and also just shortening how we said, certain things. And then I was trying to, I read this book, Self-Editing for Writers. It had a lot of helpful tips as well. And Sarah and I talked about some of those aspects. And then my editor I used on other books, she says there are 4 things you should do in the editing process: add, subtract, reorder, and clarify. And if you can think through those things, you'll add those areas that aren't either specific enough or rich enough in terms of their writing, or don't, make it clear enough. You'll subtract those extraneous scenes that we love but don't need to be there, right? And you might reorder some things to put the punch up front when you got in like chapter 3. So that's why, our book starts with a text message about some authors that want to kill them. It's just right off the bat.
Dive right in.
Dive right in, yeah.
So, what would you guys say about this process with independent publishing versus, Sarah, your experiences with traditional publishing?
Well, that's definitely a big debate in the writing world, I think, and there are writers who have experience with both and who see value in both routes for different projects. And I've at this point done both, and I've seen value in both routes. I think with traditional publishing, especially if you're on the more kind of literary end of things, it gives you an advantage just because those readers are more likely to buy books in traditional bookstores. It depends kind of on what genre you're writing in. I think for things like romance, maybe fantasy, horror, there are bigger audiences for self-published or independently published books. But yeah, I think traditional publishing is great because it gives you a lot of resources. Like for my book, I had no experience with publishing before that. It was the first time I had ever written a novel. I didn't know anything about the way that world works. And I've learned a lot more now, but it was really helpful to have that background there to have those people who knew what they were doing and who did this for a living to help put the book together and get it out there into the world so that I still, I definitely had to do some work for the marketing and that kind of thing, but I wasn't having to worry about like, how do you get an ISBN number and how do you get your book into bookstores and all of those sort of nitty gritty parts of the actual technical elements of publishing I didn't have to worry about. So that probably saved me a lot of time. So if you want to focus on the writing, obviously that's great that you can put more of your time into that. Also, there is potentially more money in traditional publishing, especially up front. A lot of people, when they independently publish, may invest some money into it, whereas with traditional, you, in theory, don't have to spend any money. There are people who will hire their own publicists and on top of whatever the publisher provides, just because these days, even if you are traditionally published, there's so much of the onus of the marketing and the publicity still falls to the author. So you still have to be proactive about that. And I think that's something that in hindsight, I've learned more about that. Like, even if you're traditionally published, you should be out there seeking opportunities to promote your work as well. I think that the big downside with traditional publishing is that you don't have as much control. The publisher, they picked my title, they picked my cover, they kind of steered the book in a certain creative direction with the manuscript. They decide what genre to market it as. And these are people who know what they're doing, so you trust their expertise to do that, but you do give up a lot of the creative control. So I think that if that's something that's really important to you and you don't want to have to make concessions there or have other people kind of involved in those decisions, then independent publishing is probably a better route for you.
Yeah, and who knows whether a traditional publisher would be interested in what we put together here with Death by Podcast, because we didn't even try. We didn't even go that route. So, but there are authors out there in the traditional world that write together. I interviewed some thriller writers, Andrews and Wilson, who've got they've got this series they write, and they're traditionally published, and they've got a system. So, and they were writing individually before they came together. So it's possible to do something like this and do it traditionally. It's also possible to do it the way we did it. To Sarah's point, yes, the big advantage of indie publishing, that is the pro, is you've got all the control, and the biggest disadvantage is you've got all the control. I mean, it comes with the territory, right? You've got to do all those little minutia things, like Sarah said, is get the ISBN number, get it uploaded to all the platforms, make sure that it's formatted correctly, that everything in terms of the not just having designed the cover, but that it fits properly within the formatting structure. So there's a lot that goes into it, but fortunately, I'd already had a team in place of doing independent publishing before this. So a book designer, that she's very fast, she's reliable, she knows what she's doing. She designs the interior of the book. We work on the front matter and the back matter with it, but then she puts it all together. Then we've got a cover designer that I've worked with before. They design the cover. And look, it's not just build us a cover. We had to give input, right, on what the cover is. And that's a skill set that you have to learn as a writer, because some writers were writing, but we might not be visual artists. So it's hard to say, this is what I want, right? So you have to look at other, covers and kind of say, this is kind of where we're headed. And so Sarah and I talked, and we gave some kind of outline to the cover designer and said, we want it to be sort of, less is more on the cover, and it's about podcasting. So we ended up with the podcast microphone with a bullet hole in it, on the front cover. We thought that kind of conveys what's going on here, And so you do that, and then you got to hire your, in this case, we didn't have to hire an editor because we edit each other and we got beta readers. But if you're doing it individually, you probably do spend the money to hire an editor. And even if you're going to, submit a query to a traditional published platform who's going to edit it themselves, people pay for editors, before they do that. So there's a cost to that. And Sarah's right, whether it's traditional or indie, you're still going to bear in this day and time much of the marketing. So, but, I think distribution in stores is going to be probably more advantageous if you're traditionally published, depending on how big a traditional publisher you're working with. I would just say, don't be afraid to try indie publishing. Just be prepared. If you do it, you're going to have to learn a lot, or you're going to have to outsource it to a lot of people that know more about it than you do, and enjoy the process. We kind of wanted to get this out as part of the podcast, kind of just have fun with it. So we never queried anybody. We didn't go with this. Who knows? We left money on the table. Probably did. Who knows? Never know. But it was still fun, right? And we had a good time doing it. And it'll be around for us to talk about. It'll just be something that, once Sarah's a New York Times bestselling author, she can look back on the day and said, yeah, a long time ago, I did this little thing, but I'm well beyond that now.
We'll have to update the cover then, have both our names say New York Times bestsellers.
Okay.
Archer and Wade.
Which leads me into our next topic. Sarah, I want to talk about your novel, The Plus One.
Yeah. So this was a novel that I published a few years ago, and it's just the same way that Death by Podcasting is a little bit of a genre blender. This one is too. It's kind of a rom-com and kind of sci-fi at the same time. It's about this robotics engineer living in Silicon Valley who builds very realistic humanoid robots for a living. So she's very smart and she loves the work that she does. She's very dedicated to her job, but she's always single and she's kind of awkward and, kind of not putting as much effort into her personal life as into her work life for sure. And her younger sister is getting married, and their mother, who works in the bridal industry, is, she has these very traditional ideas about like love and marriage. And she thinks that Kelly has to have a plus one for the wedding. And she's always kind of been on Kelly's back about being single. So Kelly gets fed up with dating in traditional ways and trying to find her plus one in traditional ways. And so she decides that she's just going to build her date. So she builds a boyfriend who is a robot, but he looks just like a human, walks, talks like a human. She's able to pass him off as her actual boyfriend and brings him to the wedding as her plus one. And so things work out great there. Like she has her date, nobody is any the wiser, but then she almost made him a little bit too good and a little bit too much of her ideal man because she starts to develop real feelings for him. And so she knows that she needs to get rid of him because the fact that she built him with company equipment is obviously against the rules, and she's keeping this big secret from everyone in her life, but she can't bring herself to turn the off switch and get rid of him. So that's kind of where the story goes.
I love
Yeah.
that. That is such a creative take, and what a way to blend like sci-fi with romance and comedy together like that.
Yeah, thank you. I definitely I'm interested in things like AI and robotics and a lot of sort of sci-fi topics. I love like Black Mirror, but I was an English major. I'm a writer. I don't know anything about that sort of thing. I did some research for writing this book. But it's definitely not my forte. I'm much more of like an armchair enthusiast. So for me, it was fun to write something that taps into those topics, but that's really much more about the human element and the characters and kind of how humans relate to machines and what we can learn from robots and the ways that we interact with robots about ourselves and about how we, interact with other humans and what does it mean to love? Does love have to be a choice? Can something that you created ever actually love you? What does that even mean? So I like to explore those sorts of questions, but also throw in the comedy too, because I always like to put a little bit of humor into everything I write.
Ugh, spam calls. Sound familiar? Introducing Line 2. Get a second phone number right on your existing phone. Imagine discounts, appointments, online forms. Handle it all without giving out your personal number. It's like having a secret weapon against spam. And when those unwanted calls sneak through, boom, blocked. No more interruptions, no more stress. Stay connected, stay protected. Keep your main number safe and out of harm's way. Ready to take back your phone? Visit line2.com/audio or download Line 2 in the App Store today.
When her book came out, I'd met her at the Charlotte Writers Club, and she was someone I had on the podcast very early on. And I remember the conversation, remember the book and the writing, really enjoyed it. So when it was time to get some help on the podcast, I said, I'm going to call Sarah. I'm going to get her to come podcast with me. Fortunately, she said yes.
Yeah, I'm glad you did. I'm not sure how much help. I think that part of the reason why you brought me and our other co-host Hannah LaRue on was to help save time so you could do your own writing. And I don't know if we actually saved you any time, but
Well, that's
we
because
had fun doing it.
I know we started thinking of other ideas we wanted to engage in.
Too
Yeah,
ambitious.
exactly. Yep.
So Landis, why don't you go ahead and tell us about your writing as well? Deadly Declarations.
Yeah. So Deadly Declarations is a novel that came out a couple of years ago. I am, as you said at the beginning, a recovering trial lawyer, which means I'm over the age of 60 and going through this, what happens after retirement and what happens in this stage of life. And my father, I told him, you better hurry up and retire, Dad, because if you don't, I'm going to retire before you do. He worked to be till he's about 87. And they were going through this, they'd been in the same house for 60 years, and I was helping them investigate retirement communities. And I just saw all the emotion that was going on in their lives of leaving their house so many years, moving into this other community and not wanting to go. As I'm thinking about writing my next mystery novel, I'm thinking that might be a good setting, a retirement community, and somebody that doesn't want to be in a retirement community. And about that time, I interviewed Scott Seifert, who's a local Charlotte historian, also a lawyer, who'd written a pretty exhaustive nonfiction book on the Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence, which was signed, as the story goes, in 1775, 1 year before the Declaration of Independence was signed in Philadelphia in 1776. And there's lots of conspiracy theories surrounding that because the language of the two documents is very similar. Did Thomas Jefferson copy from the Meck Deck? Did John Adams think that he did? So I did some research, found out that yes, John Adams did think that Thomas Jefferson copied from that document and concealed it. And so I thought, well, that's pretty good. So I decided I would set this retirement community scene. I'd have a lawyer get kicked out of his big law firm, end up there not wanting to be there, run into a couple of interesting sidekicks. And in the first chapter, they find out that a professor, a friend of one of these sidekicks, is found dead in his condominium unit. He's been working on a manuscript on the Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence. When they find his body, the manuscript is missing. So that sets them off on this journey to try to discover the truth about the Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence, which could change United States history. That is, if they don't die trying. So that's the thriller aspect of it.
I love that.
Thank you. Thank you.
You are welcome. That sounds awesome. I'm putting that on my list like immediately.
Thanks.
It's a fun read. And we talked a little bit earlier about how authors, whether you're traditionally or indie published, have to do a lot of your own publicity these days. And I think your work with Deadly Declarations is a good example of that because, it's set in a retirement community and it also has the historical story. And you've used those as tie-ins for a lot of publicity, like going and talking to retirement communities, or I think maybe doing events with historical groups too. So that's a great example of how you can be creative with your publicity and not just go to bookstores and go to book clubs and that type of thing, but look for like, are there other groups who are interested in some of the subject matter of my book that I could potentially bring this out to?
Yeah, I'll give our third musketeer here, I guess. We are Hannah LaRue, who podcasts with us. She's a publicist, and she had that idea. She speaks in terms of publicity as just an extension of storytelling, and she said, go to where the people are that want to read this kind of book, right? You're writing about retirement communities. So I think I've spoken at probably 20 retirement communities, historical groups I've been speaking, and still also look at your book and see if there's some element in it that comes back every year. Whether it's set around Halloween or some other, Earth Day or something, and use that as a way to market. And don't just have your events in bookstores. We opened with an event at Old Meck Brewery where we offered beer to people who showed up. That's a great way to get people to come out to a book signing, right? Is to offer free beer, So do your events in bars and pubs or outside waterfalls or whatever. Something is tied into which maybe, Sarah, next time you do it in a robotics factory, if that's your what you're doing. Yeah.
That could be interesting for sure.
That is honestly a genius way of looking at marketing for a book, because all you always see is, and not to knock at bookstores at all. I love bookstores. I practically live in them. But that is generally where we see author events. So stepping outside of that and finding other creative avenues, that is genius. I never would have thought, to do something like that.
Yeah, and it's also fun.
Yeah, I bet.
It's more fun for the writer. I think it's more fun for the attendees too. And also, I think people are almost a little bit oversaturated with book events, and it can be hard to get people to come out to a bookstore or a library or something like that. Especially since the pandemic, there's so much that's available online for free as well that you can attend events with authors all over the world just from your computer. So sometimes you have to offer something a little bit different or a little bit extra to get people to show up.
Yeah, like free beer.
Yeah, free beer. Another tip is, a lot of authors, and I've done this, and Sarah and I have done it together. You go out and you have author talks, or, you go interview an author, at their event. It's not just you standing up doing this thing, but you partner with other authors, which brings their followers and your followers to a collective. And it might be nothing focused directly on your book. It just might be on a topic of interest to people, in the community on writing, for example. But in the course of that, they're going to learn a little bit about who you are and what you write. You're not just standing there saying, please buy my book. If they like what you have to say, they might go look you up, for example. And so, so partner up with other authors. The community is a huge part of what we have been preaching on the podcast in terms of not just, finding out about other books, but just community with other authors to get through this insanity of being an author. Right, Sarah?
Right. Yeah. Collaborating, whether it's like co-writing. I mean, right now we're doing a podcast collab where podcasters showing up on your podcast. Any way that you can kind of cross audiences, I think is really helpful. It can bring more publicity to your event or book or whatever it is that you're doing. And it's also just fun. It's a good way to build your community and to talk with other creative people.
I am a huge fan of collaborating. I mean, obviously, I have you guys on here. I've been collaborating with a ton of other authors. I've got some agents I'm collaborating with, some small publishers, and I love being able to build that kind of a community, not just here with my podcast, but, across the board with others who are like-minded or who are in the field or even just interested and just want to see, kind of what's going on. And I really just love this community that is really just growing all the time. And I'm just happy to have you guys here.
We're
happy to be here. Yes.
Yeah, that's something that we talk about a lot on the podcast too, is community. I think it's such a huge thing, not just within our podcast community, but for readers and writers in general, and especially writers. Like, writing is tough. It can be intellectually tough. It can be emotionally tough. If you're especially if you're trying to do it as a living, and to actually sell books, that's a hard path to go down. So I think having other writers who kind of understand the struggles is such a valuable thing, not just to get notes from each other and give each other notes, but just for that kind of support. I know sometimes I need that moral support from other people who have been there.
Yes, I feel you there.
Yeah, and I would add that this series we did with our Write Quotes series, the first one, which is called The Writing Life, is free online to be downloaded in a digital format. And you can see all the different, opinions that writers have about this thing called the writing life. And it actually will give you some encouragement to find out that there are a lot of writers out there that think it's hard, even ones that have been New York Times bestselling authors. And so it gives you kind of a boost to read what they're saying and say, oh, it's not just me. It's there's other writers out there that are going through the same thing I am. So yeah, it's free online, The Write Quotes, The Writing Life. Check it out. You can download it for free. And I would say that, having podcasting, because I know you're probably going to say this too, but learning from authors by asking authors about their experiences, whether you do it on a podcast or whether you just do it over a drink, is a great way to, become a better writer too.
I agree completely. And I think, really the best way to become the best writer that you can be is to connect with other writers and learn from them. And as we share our experiences and our little anecdotes and what works for us and what doesn't work for us, and maybe we can look at something in a new way and kind of shift our perspectives. There's just a whole wealth of knowledge out there just from authors connecting with each other.
And one of our authors on the podcast said the best thing that a writer can do is be really good friends with a writer who's much better than they are.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of writers, at least speaking for myself, we're sort of social introverts. Like, we like our alone time with the computer and just being alone with our thoughts, but we also really crave that connection and community. And from what I've experienced personally, most authors, even ones who are pretty successful, they're very open and friendly, and they like connecting with readers. So you never know, if there's an author you like, reach out to them on social media. Or a lot of authors these days actually also offer editing services, so you can check the person's website and they might be willing to edit your book for a fee. So, connect with people, go to their events, talk to them on social media, leave a comment on a podcast, whatever it might be. Like, they notice that and they appreciate it.
Yeah, and be sharing with other authors too, because once you build up a little bit of a platform, people are going to ask you for input and advice, and people have come to me with questions about publishing and why I'm doing this crazy thing called indie publishing. And I was able to connect somebody recently with the woman who does our book formatting. They're very pleased with what she's doing for her. So it's a way for her, by word of mouth, to get some referrals, and for people that want to dive into this to have a good good support person to help them with a part of their project.
Yeah, and if you do have plans to publish, even if you aren't there yet, you don't even have a finished manuscript, it's never too early to start. I've heard some people say, like, oh, I don't want to think about networking or building a social media platform or anything like that because I'm still working on my manuscript. I'm not even querying yet. It's never too early. Like, start building that foundation. And because it takes a long time, it's a marathon, not a sprint, to kind of lead up to publishing. So if you want to publish eventually, think of that process as starting as early as possible.
I agree. There is no such thing as too early when it comes to networking and connecting with others, even if it is just to, bounce ideas or just to get to know other people. It doesn't even have to necessarily be, oh, let me just connect with agents and, getting ready to pitch without having a manuscript ready. Just connect with people, get to know others, build a community. And then when you are ready, whether it's, in a few weeks or in a decade, then you've already got connections in place and you've already built up these relationships. And that just kind of puts you a step ahead of the process.
Yeah. And I would say that, unless you're, top of the top and, you're making bazillions of dollars or whatever, don't say no when you're asked to do something related to your writing or your book, because you never know what that might turn into. I mean, I've been to some very small events where a few people showed up, but there might have been one person at that event who invited me to a much larger event later, because of that. And I never can connect the dots. I'm still being asked a couple years after this book to go talk on the history of the MEC deck and to talk on to retirement communities about that. And you never know who at one of those events might have referred me to someone to contact me, right? So don't say no if you get the opportunity, even if it looks small, because we're all going to have events where we go, wait a minute, there's only two people here. But with those two people engaged, you never know what might happen. One of them might be connected to a huge publisher, be the best friend of one of the best-selling authors in your genre or something. You never know. You just never know.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think, don't think of any of it as being a wasted effort. Like you said, you never know who's going to show up at an event or what something will lead to, or, who, even if there's one person there, they might send your book to their book club and then 10 other people buy your book. But we had an author on the podcast who I interviewed who talked about going to events where there's not many attendees. I think all authors at some point go to an event and like no one shows up or one or two people show up. And she said the advice she got was, if that happens, turn the camera around. Like, instead of taking a picture of the audience and saying, here, I'm at this book event, show a picture of yourself talking at a book event and post that on social media or on your blog, your website, put it in your newsletter, whatever it might be. And that's still content that you can say, like, here's what I'm doing to promote my book. It's all part of your writing journey. And I think readers really like to connect with the authors and get to know them personally. And they're interested in what you're doing as an author and kind of what the publishing journey is like for you. So you can, even if you go to an event and nobody shows, like, the fact that you were there is still something that you can use to talk about your book and potentially turn that into a post that reaches other readers who will buy your book. So none of it is ever wasted.
Yeah, and it's also just good practice, right? Because every time you get a chance to stand up in front of a group, the next time it becomes easier to do. And I'll tell a little story about John Grisham. I went to see him speak at Park Road Books here in Charlotte, and he was talking about his first book tour with A Time to Kill, which was not published by a very large publisher at the time. Everybody knows who he is. He sold a gazillion books, right? But at that first book signing, only a few people showed up, and they had 1,000 print run at the time. And he said he ended up carrying around about 998 books in the trunk of his car for several years, trying to hand them out to people, get them to take them. And not many people know the story, but they probably do now. But when he wrote The Firm and that became a big hit, then people went back and read that little book, Time to Kill, which nobody thought much of, and he couldn't give the book away to, and that became a runaway bestseller too. So you never know about those small events and what they might lead to.
There was some discourse on Twitter. I want to say last year, there was a newer author. She was talking about her book signing. It was her first book event, and two people came. And, she's just kind of venting a little bit, as some people do on social media. Just, wow, only two people came. Like, it's feeling disheartening. Is this what it's like? And all of a sudden, all these authors were chiming in. And I don't mean just little authors. There was Neil Gaiman, Stephen King, all talking about how we all have had events where no one shows up. And it's just part of the process. And, you learn a little something about yourself, and you still get to be out there, and you still get to, put yourself out there and get people to see you, even if they don't show up. And it was just really interesting reading this thread. I want to say it was last summer, of, even these like huge, big name authors that have become household names that we all know and love and adore. And just them saying, yeah, I've had events where no one showed up. And it just really, it just shows you that like
viral online.
We're all in the same boat, no matter how big or small we are, we all have these similar experiences that kind of overlap. And, that's part of why having a community with other authors is so important, so that we can see these things and share these experiences with each other.
It's a good reminder too to make the writing its own reward, because even if you're writing something that is good quality and that you've edited and you've put your heart and soul into it, it might not get an audience now. It might not get an audience ever. It might not get an audience today, but 10 years from now, it becomes a hit. Like it's so unpredictable. So if you are writing because you want to make money, then you should probably do something else. It's not like a very, some people make a lot of money at it, but it's not a very reliable source of income for most people. If you're looking to be famous, again, maybe it's not the best pathway, but write for the writing itself and then see everything else as a bonus. And if you do find success, that's wonderful. But yeah, I think you have to find the creative process to be its own reward, or else you might lose your sanity at some point along the way.
Yeah, plus use it as motivation too, perhaps. I mean, and also not just motivation, but just sort of reflection on, was that the right place to have that particular event, and what kind of events could I have in the future where maybe I can get more people there. Look, there's a lot of demands on people's time, right? And we all think that, well, we've put a book out, surely all our friends are going to put everything down they've got going on a Saturday afternoon or on a Wednesday night and come out here, but they've got busy lives, right? And just because they don't come, don't mean that they're not our friends and don't love us. But we can't necessarily count on that. So next time, think sort of beyond that and think, well, where would another place to do it? Or what did I learn from that, and how can I maybe get more people there the next time if I want to keep doing it in these settings? I just think it's all a learning process, and they also lead to good stories if you ever do become really successful, right? Where you could talk about the time that one person showed up and they weren't really there to see you. They accidentally thought someone else was speaking that night.
The way I see it is the only consistency when it comes to being an author is that it's unpredictable. You don't know what's going to sell. You don't know what's going to be successful when you're writing it. You may have hopes. You may even have an inkling or an idea or just a gut feeling, but we don't know what's going to actually sell. We don't know what numbers are going to be like when it comes out. You might write like a little dinky one-off goofy little thing and have it become a bestseller, or you could put your heart and soul into something that means the world to you and sell 2 copies. One's to your mom.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you don't even know like what's going to happen when you sit down to write. I mean, you can't control how smart you are, how talented you are, how inspired you are on a certain day. You can't force the muse to show up. Really, all you can control is putting in the time and the effort. You can get your butt in the chair and work. So I try to focus on that. And as long as I'm putting in as much time as I can and making an honest effort to be satisfied with that, obviously that's easier said than done. Of course, there are going to be times when I'm like, I wish that I had sold 1,000,000 copies, winning awards or whatever. But, you have to focus on what you can actually do something about, I think.
Yeah, and I was listening to the Am Writing podcast, and one of the authors on there who has been published both traditionally and as an indie author was talking about how she likes to do both depending upon the particular project. And she was giving some tips on, what to think about. And sometimes you might have a project that a traditional publisher thinks is too niche, for example, to publish, and yet it would be the kind of book that would kind of round out your portfolio and do something that you want to do. And if you've built up a little bit of a following, it might be worth giving it a shot to do that book that someone, they're not saying you're not a good writer. They're saying we just don't think we can sell enough copies to make it worth our while. And you might be able to sell more copies as an indie author than, look, traditional publishing, one of our authors said, they don't know what they want, until, they have a success, right? And then sometimes they try to piggyback on that success, but, traditional publishing isn't always right. And a lot of indie authors have shown that the lines have been blurred now between what's most successful indie and traditional. And there are a lot of really successful indie authors out there, and a lot of traditionally published authors who sort of built up a platform on traditional who decided, I think I can do this better, faster, and the way I want it as an indie published author. So look at both, try both, see what works best for you.
And we've also seen indie authors who started self-publishing and then get picked up
Right.
by a traditional and one of the larger traditional publishers later on. So it doesn't ever hurt to put your stories out there. It can only, the worst that can happen is that nothing happens. And the best that can happen is that, your writing changes your life or changes someone else's life.
Yeah. And the one bit of advice I give, if you're going to do that, don't just put your, second draft manuscript up, without going through the kind of process we've been talking about. My rule is try to do as much or more than they would do in the traditionally published process. Have a editor, have a copy editor, have a good book designer, have a good interior design, do an advance, don't publish it as soon as it's ready. Give yourself a little time to set up a little bit of marketing plan. Do some of the same things. Don't just put it up, because it's very unlikely if you just put it up after draft one that anybody's going to pay attention to it. And it's not going to do you any good long term, because you wouldn't have put out your best work if you did it that way.
Definitely.
Yeah, it takes so much work even to write one draft that you might as well put in the work to give it the chance that it deserves.
Yes.
Make it as good as you can.
Yeah.
Well, and first drafts are never supposed to be good anyway.
Right.
So that's definitely not something you want people reading out there or representing you, because your first draft is supposed to suck.
I know that. And then I still, every time I write a first draft and I read it back, I'm like, what is this? I still beat myself up about it. But you're right. And I know that, but it's still hard.
And that was the best writing advice I have ever received, was write the worst first draft that you can as long as it is finished. Because my issue was always wanting to have everything perfected as I was writing through it and spending too much time editing as I was going, that I was never finishing anything. Because I'm too focused on having every sentence be perfect before I move on to the next one. And then the project would stop and stall, and I'd never go back to it again because I'm so burnt out on it. So with my current project, I'm like, I'm not going back. I'm not looking back at a single thing I write unless it's like reading the previous paragraph for the next time I start writing to figure out where I was left off. But don't even look at it again until you hit the end. And then you can see how bad it is.
Right. I know some writers who do edit as they go and it works for them, but I think that for most people, it's helpful to do what you're talking about, where you just get it out there or just get it done. Because I know sometimes for me, I have a tendency to like really plan a lot in advance. And sometimes I think that I lose steam before I even start writing, because I've spent so much time just planning and thinking about it that I've already kind of gotten to the phase where I'm like, oh, I don't know if this is going to work, but I haven't even started the draft yet. So sometimes you have to just write.
I think that's good points by both of you, but I would say too that everybody's different, right? So somebody's method might not be another's, and perhaps if you get more experience, maybe if I write more books, I'll be able to do some of that as I go along, because I know that I'm kind of structuring it in a certain way. But if you're just kind of figuring out your structure and figuring out your characters as you go, maybe it's better to go ahead and write it out and then come back and mess with it. Because you might end up working really hard on a chapter and getting it just perfect, and then find out from your editor, we don't need that chapter. That chapter does nothing for this book. I remember one of the books I wrote early on, the novellas, there was a second or third chapter in the book, and the editor said, we don't need this. Yeah, but it's a great scene. It's this protest march in Washington, D.C., and people holding all these signs up. Yeah, but you can do that in like one sentence and keep the story moving. It turned out to be right. I mean, it's turned out to be good advice. But, if I'd spent forever working on that, I'd have been much more disappointed about, killing it off than I was otherwise.
Yeah, you can always take it out and
you can't always take it out later. You should.
That's what I tell myself. Reuse it.
Take it out. You either use it for another project or turn it into a short story. That's a great idea.
Yeah.
And I think that's, really good with writing too, is take what methods and what styles work best for you. And, we all have different advice and about what we think is best, but that's just because it's what works for us. So I think that is an important part of the writing process, is just figuring out what methods work best for you and what approaches help you get to the end of your own project.
Right. That's definitely something I've learned from the podcast too, because we talk to so many authors and we'll ask them the same sorts of questions about like, how do you, do you outline in advance? Do you not? What's your process like? Do you write every day? Do you not write every day? And everybody is so different and has different things that work for them. And there's really no sort of hard and fast rules, except I think the only things that are universal are you have to read and you have to write. Like as long as you're doing those things and putting the time to do those things, then everything else is really subjective and up to you.
Yeah, we also asked them if they could tell their younger writing self something of value that had they known it back when they were a younger writer, based on all their experience since then, what would it be? And we got some interesting answers, but some common themes are sort of, be patient. It's not going to happen overnight. Don't be too hard on yourself. There are enough people out there that are going to be hard on you, without you having to do it to yourself. So those are some really good lessons that we've learned from other authors, through this process.
Yeah, definitely. So we are getting close on time here, ready to wrap things up. Do you guys have anything else that you would like to share? Any, future projects you want to mention for us to keep an eye out on? The floor is yours.
Gosh, well, I think we've talked about all of our writing projects. I mean, I have the +1 out. Deadly Declarations, obviously you should go and check out. Our Write Quote series is great, and Death by Podcasting as well. I've got some new fiction and screenwriting projects in the works, and you can also check out my website, saraharcherwrites.com, and I have links on there to some short stories I published as well, and poetry, and keep up with my other writing news there. But yeah, just if you're a writer out there, just keep at it. I think that's the biggest thing that we hear over and over from other writers on the podcast and in our literary community is it can be a tough road and it can be unpredictable. But if you love it, you're going to do it no matter what. So just keep at it, keep doing it, and find joy in the process.
Yeah, and I hesitate to say, too much about a project I'm working on because I've been delayed with lots of things in this one, but I am going to write a sequel to Deadly Declarations. Instead of focusing on the period 1775, we're going to be focusing on the gold rush period in Charlotte, North Carolina, that, where the first branch of the U.S. Mint was set up in the 1830s. Not many people know that gold was discovered on the East Coast before the California gold rush, about 30 miles from Charlotte, by a little boy who was out fishing one day, who found a 17-pound gold nugget that they used as a doorstop for 3 years because they didn't know what it was. So yeah, there's a big history in this part of the country as well about gold and underground shafts, and thought it might be fun to bury a body in one of those old underground shafts and do something with that. So I'm in the research phase of that right now, but that'll be the next project. Unless Sarah and I figure out something we want to do in between that, it's always good if you're bogged down on one project, try to knock out a shorter one,
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, but yeah, I echo what Sarah says in terms of, just enjoying the process and writing and reading, and yeah, thank you for having us on the podcast.
Thank you for joining me. All right. Well, we will go ahead and wrap up here. Thank you both again. And remember to check out Death by Podcasting and the Charlotte Readers podcast.
Thanks, Krystle.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. This has been Must Love Books. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Patreon under @MustLoveBooksPodcast. Thank you and happy reading.
What's standing between you and your first sale on Shopify? Time, expertise, resources? What if you could multiply all three? Product descriptions? Done. Store insights? Delivered. 2 a.m. customer questions? Handled instantly. Entrepreneurs on Shopify are reaching their first sale faster with AI that works with you. Go to shopify.com/first sale to see how entrepreneurs use AI to grow their businesses faster. That's shopify.com/first sale.
When your company earns unlimited 2% cash back on all purchases with Capital One, that's serious business. So Stephen at SandCloud got a serious business card, the Spark Cash Plus card from Capital One.
We used our 2% cash back to help build our retail presence.
Savvy, Steven.
And we get big purchasing power, so our business can spend more and earn more.
The Spark Cash Plus card from Capital One. What's in your wallet?
Terms and conditions apply. Find out more at CapitalOne.com/SparkCashPlus.